Greeting, dear ladies. I am Kryon of Magnetic Service. My partner steps away. For some time, we have been giving you information about Lemuria. Specifically, what you now call the Sisterhood. I would like to continue that by giving you information. It may surprise you, it may not, about what it was like then and what you're doing now. And also a comparison of what you are able to do now that could never be done then. First of all, what you have in the entire idea of a sisterhood is a reawakening, a rejuvenation of an ancient idea. Literally, from then to now, what you have is a society that threw away the core of their spirituality. In Lemuria, which was one of the first civilizations of humanity to have any semblance of spiritual order from the teachers from the stars, it was original, it was new, it was basic. But what you had was an acknowledgement of what the gender-specific tasks were. There was no vote. It was innate, understanding, intuitive, common sense. The women gave the men advice from the stars. They had the intuition. There was no question. No one ever questioned whether the women should do what they did. Just like no man ever questioned whether the women should give birth. It's not necessarily about the plumbing. It's that the brains called for it. The woman's brain is the one who was nurturing and caring and raised the children and was connected. The men's tasks were clear, and their responsibilities were in other areas. And they needed the women. The women actually did more work then than they do now. They were tasked with knowing what was going to happen, when the weather would be right, when the oceans would be right for fish. And I've painted this picture before, but where it differs from what you might think is what I'm going to tell you now. You live in an elegant society, and one that is enabled. In Lemuria, in those times, you're dealing with a very, very basic society. One that had no history at all. There was no experimentation with anything you have, even close to democracy. None of these things were there. In fact, it was super linear, as you might expect for anything that was a beginning. You may find this funny, but there was no circle when it came to the sisterhood. The only time they worked in a circle was when they assisted with underwater birth. That's the only time. Every single meeting was in a straight line. The elders sat in front, the younger ones sat in back. There was one leader, and the leader is the only one who was allowed to speak, ever. The idea that some women might stand up and give their opinion was just several thousand years too soon. The same thing happened with the men. The elders were in charge. The younger ones sat in back. The younger ones were always in training. They weren't even considered part of the group until they sat in the front row. These are the things you face with elementary societies. So the very first thing I tell you is that what you have now is so much grander. You can steer things in this, your circle, in ways that they never could. And so we don't ask you to emulate them or what you remember. What we ask you to do is graduate from what was to what is. This is a resurgence of appropriate shamanship within women. It's a gentle resurgence. It is one that you would have that eventually men will be attracted to because of what you do and what you hear. The gentleness of it will attract the men to what you have. That's different than you might expect. You might say, well, who was in charge in a sisterhood? In a linear society, it was always the leader. In the case that we have spoken of, Meliha did all the work. You might ask yourself, well then, how were the women involved? It's an interesting way they made decisions. Only the front row was involved, and they did it through hand signals of who was and who was not in a certain mind to do a certain thing. There was a collective decision, but only of the elders, and Meliha could override any of them. This is not a democracy. This is very, very basic cultural stuff. It isn't that way today. You have an opportunity to carry into your sisterhood from the immediate sisterhood initialization. You have the ability to carry that which you have earned, the enablement, the decision-making, the softness, the equality. But here's what I really wanted to tell you. In that original culture, the women took their power, and the men liked it and needed it. And if you ask any woman then, how does it feel? They would say, it feels correct. It is right. Why do you ask? No one was afraid of being a shaman. And you are. And that's the next step. So if you're going to emulate the past, I want you to try to remember what it's like to feel full empowerment, to know that you belong doing what you're doing, and that it will not upset the apple cart, as you might say. What women have that men don't expect is a beautiful, beautiful example of caring, love, compassion, and that will win over anything else in the planet. Women, take your power, because the power is the same one we talk about all the time. It's love. And so it is.